A Cowboy Christmas Carol. By Melinda Curtis. Prologue. September. And no pressure. No pressure. Steady now, Tate, Ryan Oakley told his muttering twin while guiding his fidgety mount Susie into the heeling side of the team roping box. How Ryan heard Tate amid the noise of the rodeo was a mystery only explained by the twin bond. Next up in the team roping competition are the Oakley brothers. The announcer's voice boomed in the covered arena. Tate muttered about pressure again. Ryan reminded him to be steady again. And the announcer carried on. Riding the header side is Tate, leaving the heeling to Ryan. These two are each in the running for third place in the Prairie Circuit and have an opportunity to beat out the Cole brothers. It all comes down to this last run. Yep. It did. Ryan and Tate had never gotten this far before. They were hungry for a place in the top three. Third place in the Prairie Circuit meant there'd be a national postseason, big purses and high-paying endorsement opportunities. No pressure. No pressure. Steady now, Ryan repeated in a soothing voice. He eased back on the reins with his left hand, flexing his grip on the throwing rope in his right. You boys ready? Chet, the chute worker, asked Ryan, his white handlebar mustache twitching. At Ryan's nod, Chet released the steer with a clank of the gate. Out bolted several 100 pounds of compact Corrientes bovine intent upon hightailing it to the other side of the arena without being roped by horns or heels. Yah! Ryan kicked his horse into action. And even though Susie leaped forward, the world slowed for Ryan. In a few strides, Ryan and Susie were almost ahead of Tate, which wasn't good. Tate needed to be leading. And the steer was veering to the right, into Ryan's path. Not good either. Add half a second. Maybe more. Neither one of them could afford more than that. Ryan couldn't throw his rope around the steer's heels until Tate landed his around its horns. They may call the competition team roping, but they each were timed separately. Ryan reined in his mount slightly, adjusting his speed to Tate's pace. The steer adopted a drunken weave. Ryan and Tate closed ranks around him, straightening his path. Throw the rope, Tate. Too many seconds were ticking past. They were thundering toward the arena's midline. Throw the rope, Tate. Finally, his brother gave it a toss. The lasso fell perfectly around both of the steer's horns. Ryan was aware of Tate tying off, backing off, slowing the steer. But his body was switching to instinctive mode, feeling, not thinking. The twirl of his rope, the rhythm of the steer's heels, his lungs filling with air, his muscles bunching, gathering strength. Ryan let the rope fly. It was a good throw. A perfect throw. And yet he knew. He knew like he knew the sun was going to rise tomorrow. They'd taken too long. They'd both come in fourth. Again. A Cowboy Christmas Carol. By Melinda Curtis. Prologue. September. And no pressure. No pressure. Steady now, Tate, Ryan Oakley told his muttering twin while guiding his fidgety mount Susie into the heeling side of the team roping box. How Ryan heard Tate amid the noise of the rodeo was a mystery only explained by the twin bond. Next up in the team roping competition are the Oakley brothers. The announcer's voice boomed in the covered arena. Tate muttered about pressure again. Ryan reminded him to be steady again. And the announcer carried on. Riding the header side is Tate, leaving the heeling to Ryan. These two are each in the running for third place in the Prairie Circuit and have an opportunity to beat out the Cole brothers. It all comes down to this last run. Yep. It did. Ryan and Tate had never gotten this far before. They were hungry for a place in the top three. Third place in the Prairie Circuit meant there'd be a national postseason, big purses and high-paying endorsement opportunities. No pressure. No pressure. Steady now, Ryan repeated in a soothing voice. He eased back on the reins with his left hand, flexing his grip on the throwing rope in his right. You boys ready? Chet, the chute worker, asked Ryan, his white handlebar mustache twitching. At Ryan's nod, Chet released the steer with a clank of the gate. Out bolted several 100 pounds of compact Corrientes bovine intent upon hightailing it to the other side of the arena without being roped by horns or heels. Yah! Ryan kicked his horse into action. And even though Susie leaped forward, the world slowed for Ryan. In a few strides, Ryan and Susie were almost ahead of Tate, which wasn't good. Tate needed to be leading. And the steer was veering to the right, into Ryan's path. Not good either. Add half a second. Maybe more. Neither one of them could afford more than that. Ryan couldn't throw his rope around the steer's heels until Tate landed his around its horns. They may call the competition team roping, but they each were timed separately. Ryan reined in his mount slightly, adjusting his speed to Tate's pace. The steer adopted a drunken weave. Ryan and Tate closed ranks around him, straightening his path. Throw the rope, Tate. Too many seconds were ticking past. They were thundering toward the arena's midline. Throw the rope, Tate. Finally, his brother gave it a toss. The lasso fell perfectly around both of the steer's horns. Ryan was aware of Tate tying off, backing off, slowing the steer. But his body was switching to instinctive mode, feeling, not thinking. The twirl of his rope, the rhythm of the steer's heels, his lungs filling with air, his muscles bunching, gathering strength. Ryan let the rope fly. It was a good throw. A perfect throw. And yet he knew. He knew like he knew the sun was going to rise tomorrow. They'd taken too long. They'd both come in fourth. Again. Chapter 1. December. I'm quitting. There was a ringing in Ryan's ears. And it wasn't from the clatter of dishes, the din of voices, or the Christmas carols playing in the Buffalo Diner on a Sunday night in early December. Quitting? Ryan very carefully set down his fork and stopped eating his pecan pie so that he could stare across the table at his twin brother. We made a deal, Tate. To keep competing in team roping until one or both of them placed high enough in the Prairie Rodeo circuit that one or both of them would be invited to a post-season, big money, national event. Where they'd earn seed money for a spread of their own. In fact, Ryan had asked his brother to dinner at the Buffalo Diner to discuss a strategy for moving forward next season. Moving ahead, not stopping. We're not quitters. Unlike their biological parents, who'd quit everything they'd ever set out to do, including raise their kids. Which was why Ryan and Tate had a foster family. It's just roping. Tate pushed around pecan bits on his pie plate, though most of his slice remained untouched. You don't need me to compete. That's an excuse. Ryan searched Tate's face, gripping his blue jeans behind his knees. For years, staring at his identical twin was like staring in a mirror. Same square jaw. Same strong nose. Same brown eyes, thick brows, and black hair. Lately, Tate had stopped shaving, claiming to want to grow a beard. For once, a stranger might be hard-pressed to see a resemblance between the brothers. But Ryan saw more than a stranger would, beard or no. Ryan took note of a twitch in his brother's cheek, an indication of deep-seated worry. And he couldn't ignore Tate's reluctance to look Ryan in the eye, a tell that something important was being left unsaid. Evie Grace approached their booth, planting her flashy yellow cowboy boots tableside. Evening, boys. Despite addressing them both, Evie directed a practiced smile at Tate. Ryan was used to being on the periphery of Tate's atmosphere. He rubbed his palms over his thighs, waiting for Evie to have her moment in Tate's sun. Evie. Tate acknowledged her with the nice, friendly smile he was known for, before glancing at her boots. You must have a pair of boots in every color. Nearabouts. Her smile grew. I just bought a big screen television. It's perfect for watching any sport, including the Rodeo Nationals. You should come over. That's nice of you to offer. Tate tipped his hat, still looking as friendly as a well-fed puppy. I'll let you know. Ryan waited for her to make her exit before resuming their conversation. Are you throwing in the towel because we didn't qualify this year? They'd both had a slump midsummer and had never recovered their standing. We almost made it. We did. Tate clenched and unclenched his rope-throwing hand, although not all the way. His fingers were still bruised and swollen from a recent ranch accident. Our scores and rankings are separate, You can go on competing without me. Ryan could, but he didn't want to leave his twin behind. If you're worried about your hand, don't be. Doc said nothing's broken. They'd taken test rides on a new bucking bull their foster father had purchased for his rodeo stock company. Test rides on bucking stock were nothing new. They'd been doing them for nearly 20 years for fun. But this time, Tate's fingers had twisted in the rigging when he was thrown, and he'd been fretting over the injury ever since. Or he's worried about something else. Hey, Tate. Sophie Jean Goddard, a pretty redhead, stopped by their table, smiling at Tate, receiving a smile in return. She gave Ryan a tentative glance. Ryan ignored her. It wasn't him she'd come over to talk to. You've done something different with your hair, Tate told Sophie. Jean, smiling at her as if she was his one and only. Looks nice. You noticed. Sophie Jean tittered like a lark. Are you going to be at the buckboard on Saturday? At his smile and nod, Sophie Jean said, Save a dance for me? I'll try. When she moved on, Tate showed Ryan his bruised fingers. You see this? It's a sign. It's not a sign. Unlike their estranged biological mother, Ryan didn't believe in them. If they hadn't been in a window booth at the Buffalo Diner and sitting in front of God and everyone in Clementine, Oklahoma, Ryan might have said the words louder. Instead, he tried to style a reassuring smile after Frosty the Snowman, currently on display as a pepper shaker on their table. If anything, it means you should retire from recreational bull riding. Now, enough with the quitting. Let's talk about changes we should make for next season. A group of cowgirls stopped at their booth. Kira Edwards artfully tossed her long blonde hair over her shoulder. Didn't see you two at the buckboard last evening. The statement was directed at Tate. Ryan sighed, ready to wait out the women vying for his twin's attention. It was poker night at the Dunn Roman Ranch. Tate gave each woman a smile and a compliment about their hair, their hat, or their boots. We'll be at the buckboard next Saturday, he promised. When it came to the single Oakley brothers, the single women in town were only interested in Tate, the Oakley who was always open to their charms. And for the most part, Ryan was fine with that. The ladies spotted a trio of friends and moseyed along. Tate set his elbows on the table and frowned at Ryan. It wouldn't kill you to be nice every once in a while. It makes people feel good. It would make you feel good. Ryan frowned right back at him. And it wouldn't hurt you to think about the future every once in a while, to make us feel good. We're 31. That's young in rodeo years but ancient when it comes to having a place of your own. They lived in the bunkhouse at the Dunn Roman Ranch, their foster parents' operation. You know what I'm talking about. Tate's frown deepened. You spend so much time looking up to make sure there's a roof over our heads that you're missing out. On what? Tate waved his good hand around, possibly gesturing toward the single women in attendance, possibly indicating the holiday decorations in the Buffalo Diner, which were intense. Christmas music played beneath the sound of the hungry dinner crowd. It was the season to be jolly, and most folks in Clementine, Oklahoma, were gushing with the holiday spirit. An old memory surfaced. 2 Christmas tree sugar cookies lay on the coffee table, each with a wooden matchstick stuck in the middle. Ryan and Tate couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. Jingle bells. Jingle bells, Mom lit each matchstick. Here's to having a roof over our heads at the holiday. Now, blow out your candles and wish each other a Merry Christmas. Santa missed our house this year, but if you're really good, he'll find us next year. Bah, humbug. Santa had a bad record of finding the Oakley boys.
Yeah.
Ryan wasn't much for the enthusiasm of the holidays, given he'd been deprived of them during the first 13 years of his life. And having grown up with so little, Ryan couldn't wrap his head around the expense of the Christmas season, decorations, cards, holiday sweaters. It was surprising to him that Tate didn't feel the same way. But then again, Tate was more of a glass-half-full type of guy, while Ryan. Inside, I'm as sour green as the Grinch. Guarded. Standoffish. Hard to get to know. The cold twin. Or so people used to say when the Oakleys first came to Clementine as foster kids. Back then, Ryan lived in fear of his parents arriving to take them back. And at school, he'd had to watch Tate's back as well as his own. You couldn't just make friends with anyone who returned Tate's carefree smile and naive trust. Kids took advantage. They wanted your lunch or your new shoes or to give you drugs or cigarettes. Foster boys couldn't be labeled as troublemakers, or they'd be sent to a new home. And since Ryan liked the Dunn-Roman ranch, Ryan had watched out for both of them. He still did. So, yeah, Ryan was the guarded, hard-to-get-to-know, cold Oakley twin. But he was also the Oakley who planned for the future. There's more to life than roping competitions and rodeo dust. Tate's gaze roamed everywhere but Ryan's face. I'm hanging up my competition spurs. We like the rodeo life, Ryan said with complete composure, although inside his stomach was doing a barrel roll. And we like rodeo dust. Do we? Tate stroked his beard. Again, Ryan wondered what was really going on inside his twin's head. Are you quitting the DRR? The Dunn-Roman Ranch was a stock company that provided roughshod livestock to rodeos inside and outside of Oklahoma, from Houston to Greensboro to Chicago to Denver. Ryan and Tate, and a dozen other ranch hands, drove cattle rigs and managed animals during rodeos, which was convenient since their competition travel expenses were covered by the job. I'm not quitting the Dunn-Roman Ranch, Tate said in a hollow voice that implied he held back a word, yet. At some point, we have to stop dreaming and be realistic. But Tate still didn't look Ryan in the eye, making his words land hard on the wrong side of the buzzer. We're glorified ranch hands, not rodeo stars. That's not true. Ryan stabbed his fork into his pecan pie slice to keep himself from pounding his fist on the table. What brought this on? Did some horse stomp your foot when you weren't looking? No, of course not. And don't be such a darn fool. Tate slid out of the booth. I'll see you back at the ranch. Hang on. Ryan caught his brother's arm when he would have walked past. Give me one more year. I want to upgrade our mounts. But he'd hesitated broaching the topic since quality horseflesh was luxury sports car expensive to mid-ranking cowboys like them. We need better horses. That's the only difference between the Pierce brothers and us. The Pierce brothers had come in first place in the Prairie Circuit this year. And last year. And the year before. Their horses were fast and smart with cows in the arena. If they wanted to make Pierce money, they needed horses like the Pierces had. Just like they have. We can't afford better mounts. Tate stared at Ryan's hand. Isn't that a sign? It's not a sign. Look, at least think about it. Ryan let his hand drop. Horses bred and trained for the rodeo will put us in the next tier of prize money. Enough to cover the cost of the mounts? Tate shook his head. But at least he wasn't walking away. If we make the postseason, it will. It was a gamble. Ryan knew it. But it was a play he was willing to make. We can do this. We can buy our own spread. By shelling out our savings to buy horses? Tate said cynically. How is money spent on horses for a dream any different than money thrown away on booze or cards? The latter being the downfall of their parents. An investment in yourself is never money wasted, Ryan said, sounding like a fortune cookie fortune. But he believed it. He believed in them. A familiar red truck drove past their window, illuminated by the streetlights. Ryan trailed its progress to the feed store. You wanted a sign? There it is. Tate followed the direction of his gaze. No. Why not? Ryan downed his coffee and then got to his feet. Tate gave him a look that said he thought Ryan was confused. Not her. Yes, her. Joanna Pierce was a local horse breeder and trainer, the younger sister of the winning Pierce brothers and provider of their mounts. I'm going to ask her to sell us a pair of horses. Do you want to come along? Nope. Tate shook his head. You're wasting your time. Those horses cost serious money and she's never liked you. Ryan paused, frowning. You mean she's never liked us? They'd always been something of a package deal. Not us. Tate shook his head again. Joe Pierce doesn't like you. Have you forgotten the high school pranks you pulled on each other our senior year? No. But that's just water under the bridge. Their rivalry had ended when they graduated high school. Ryan shoved his arms into his jacket, settled his cowboy hat on his head and grinned at his twin. Wish me luck. You're gonna need it. Tate walked out. Ryan settled up their bill, thinking about Joe and the pranks they pulled on each other. It had all been harmless fun, hadn't it? He hoped she thought so. Chapter 2. Ryan pushed through the door of Clementine Feed on a mission to buy a pair of horses. Immediately, he was assaulted with a plethora of holiday greenery, sparkly ornaments, plush stuffed Santas of every size and shape and piped Christmas carols. He craned his neck, searching the store for Joe. To his right, there were circular racks full of shirts and jackets for men, women, and children. Wooden cubbies had been built along one wall for blue jeans. The opposite wall had hats hanging on display and boots on shelves. No Joe. On the other side of the store, you could find anything in the tall aisles for the care of pets and livestock. Tack, leashes, cat beds, mouse traps. He walked past row after row. No Joe. And at the counter behind it all, you could place an order for larger amounts of feed, fencing, lumber supplies, or power tools. Success? Joe stood at the counter talking to Izzy Adams, who was working the cash register. Joe wore what was typical for winter ranch wear in Oklahoma, a gray hoodie underneath a maroon puffed vest, cowboy boots and hat, blue jeans. Except the hat that sat on her short brown hair was the wide-brimmed style few favored, and her jeans were tucked into her plain brown boots, also not a popular style. She'd always been, well, old school. And she'd always been stubbornly proud of it. Joe was accompanied by 2 miniature cowboys who were manhandling the gingerbread ornaments hung on the Christmas tree next to the counter. The boy with the green jacket plucked a gingerbread man from the tree and took a bite, chewing open-mouthed as he laughed at his sibling. I told you I'd do it. Crumbs spewed from his mouth.
Ew.
The boy with the blue jacket shoved his brother back. Mom. Max ate a dog cookie. And then both boys started to laugh. And Ryan, being a twin who'd experienced his share of moments just like this one, although not the dog biscuit eating kind, chuckled along with them. Boys, behave. Joe spared them a stern glance that silenced all laughter in the feed store before turning back to Izzy to say, add a dog treat to my tab. Joe was one of those no-nonsense, working cowgirls. Rough and tumble. Full of try and talk as a kid. And when she got older, as touchy as a spring bee. She'd done well at several sports in school, and during their senior year, she spoke her mind to the point she'd had a desk on reserve in detention, right next to Ryan's. Something of a rebel, she'd eloped with her high school boyfriend on graduation night. Several months later, Joe had given birth to those 2 twin boys. Once she'd become a mother, she'd changed. Straightened out her life. Ditched Bobby and his last name. Took over her family's ranch operations and horse training, buying the small spread from her dad, making it into something. She became known around Clementine as a hard worker and someone who didn't put up with any guff. For the life of him, Ryan couldn't remember how their high school rivalry had begun. The last few months of their senior year had been filled with pranks on each other, escalating until one final act before graduation. Joe had taken Ryan's motorcycle and put it in the old oak tree in front of the high school. He'd been livid. She'd been expelled. And that was the end of that. Suddenly, a wave of doubt washed over Ryan. He and Joe weren't friendly nowadays. She might still hold a grudge. If she did, buying mounts from Joe wasn't going to be easy. It might, in fact, be nigh on impossible without some serious apologizing. How badly do I want to win? He didn't need to think twice, to the nth degree. Ryan wanted a place he and Tate could call home. He wanted to make sure they wouldn't just quit. Joe's cell phone rang. She dug it out of her vest pocket and hit a button. "Ma, why are you doing a video call?" Joe held her phone at eye height. From where Ryan stood behind Joe, her phone display was filled with a side view of someone's cheek and lips. There wasn't enough of a face to identify the caller, even if he knew it was Joe's mother. "I didn't call you on video," Lois Pierce said, still holding the phone and its camera next to her cheek. "You did call using video, Ma." Joe showed her boys the screen. "Can you see Grandma?" "Yes." Her kids chortled. "You hit the video button." Again. Joe turned the phone screen back to herself. "At least hold the phone in front of your face." Ryan smiled. His foster father, who he endearingly called Dad, was similarly challenged by technology. Mrs. Pierce's features came into view on Joe's screen: short brown hair, age-spotted face. "I was trying to do the loudspeaker thing. Can I help it if my little phone buttons are little?" The boys continued to laugh. The gingerbread dog biscuit Max had bitten into was handed over to the boy with the blue jacket, who took a bite. A gagging noise followed immediately. "Dean. Boys. There will be no more dog biscuit eating." Joe snatched the remains of the gingerbread man from her precocious son, tucking it in a vest pocket. "What do you need, Ma?" "Replacement bulbs for the outdoor lights. The big, colorful ones." Mrs. Pierce craned her neck as if looking for someone. Perhaps Ryan, since she appeared to be peering at him. "And a cowboy. Bring yourself one home." "Ma," Joe said in a tone that implied eye rolls were being made. "They don't sell cowboys at the feed store." "But I see one," Mrs. Pierce sing-songed, waving. Joe turned and spotted Ryan, who was the only cowboy in the store besides the boys. She quickly spun back around, but not before he registered a Christmas wreath on that sweatshirt of hers. "I'll see you at home, Ma." Joe ended the call and tucked her phone back in her pocket. The way Joe was hunching her shoulders made Ryan suspect that Tate was right. Joe still held a grudge against him. Ryan didn't much care what folks thought about him. But with Joe. Steady now. He shifted his feet, as fidgety as Susie before a roping run. A lot was riding on the next few minutes. But those hunched shoulders of Joe's meant the outcome was uncertain. And because of his early childhood, uncertainty triggered his fight-or-flight reflex. "Steady now. I need those horses. For the future. For Tate. Your mom is like my mom, Joe." Izzy laughed. "Unhappy while I was married to my ex-husband but perpetually unhappy with my single status." "Yep," Joe agreed. Ryan settled his nerves, picked up his feet and sauntered up to the counter as if he was interested in feed. "Hey, Izzy." "Joe." Joe spared him a chilly glance from beneath her wide-brimmed, white cowboy hat. "Just like old times." Except Ryan's pulse increased and he had the strongest urge to smile, a reaction he associated with attraction to the opposite sex. But not to Joe Pierce. Never to Joe Pierce. My wires must be crossed. Definitely. His emotions were all tangled up by the possibility of Tate retiring and getting stuck as a ranch hand forever with nothing to look forward to but a weekly paycheck and the comfort of the bunkhouse. "Merry Christmas, Ryan," Joe said dismissively. Her words were as cool as the weather, and her wishes early by his estimation. Christmas was still weeks away. Bah, humbug. He hoped to keep Christmas out of their transaction. "Give Ludlow a few minutes before you pull up to the loading dock," Izzy told Joe, handing her a receipt for her purchases. "I'll be with you in a couple of minutes, Ryan." And then Izzy disappeared into the back room. A few minutes. Ryan hoped that was all he needed. Time to break the ice and test the waters. He smiled at Joe. "How about those cowboys?" Joe tucked a small wallet into her vest pocket and zipped it closed. And then she glanced at Ryan again. The ice storm descended, hardening her features just like they used to in high school. Are you talking to me? He is, Mom. One of her boys came to stand at her side, the one with the blue jacket. He had Joe's inquisitive brown eyes and Bobby Leith's dark brown hair beneath a dingy straw cowboy hat. Which cowboys are you talking about, mister? The football team. At their blank looks, he added, the Dallas Cowboys? Lots of folks in Oklahoma rooted for them. We don't watch football. Let's go, Dean. Joe placed one hand on Dean's back and glanced toward the other boy, who was still admiring the tree. Or the gingerbread dog biscuit ornaments. Move it, Max. Ryan's hopes sank. Although they both lived in Clementine, he realized they didn't interact at all. That was something he needed to remedy if he wanted to do business with her. The question was, how? Tate would smile and make nice. Tate would be helpful. Don't lollygag, Max. Joe, and Ryan's chances, took a step toward the door. I guess you're an Oklahoma City Thunder fan, then? Ryan eased into her path, trying not to look desperate. Basketball? Ryan, she said wearily. I don't watch sports. No sports, Max told him, coming to stand next to Joe, a mirror image of his brother if not for the mischievous glint in his eyes. No sports except rodeo, Dean said proudly, hooking his thumbs in his belt loops, like a cocksure cowboy twice his age and half again his height. Why does everybody assume I watch sports? Joe narrowed her eyes as she stared at Ryan. He got the message. Today, everybody meant Ryan, and talking sports to her was a form of guff. He rocked back on his heels, both physically and emotionally. I was just trying to be friendly. Like Tate, who everyone gravitated toward and made small talk with. You and I aren't friendly. Joe's stare was as hard as a steer's horn and just as capable of wounding him. And I'd like to keep it that way. There's no harm in mending fences with someone you might do business with. Ryan was past the point of backing down. Or someone you have history with. I don't like our history. Joe dug in a vest pocket and drew out her truck keys. And I'm not doing business with you, Ryan. Her boys stared back and forth at the adults before them with open mouths. Why don't you like him, Mom? Max gave Ryan a considering look, going so far as to poke Ryan's boot with the toe of his. He doesn't look like he's out to steal our last dollar. I bet he wants to buy a horse. Dean sized Ryan up. And you said we need to sell horses before Christmas. Joe rolled her eyes and almost smiled. Are you two my business managers now? Yep. Max grinned. Do you have any money, mister? Holding out his hand, palm up, Dean wasted no time on jokes. On me? Ryan blurted. He's on the prairie circuit. Joe stared at Ryan as if this was his biggest sin. Oh, both boys said, crestfallen. The mood among the trio turned as solemn as a funeral. Ryan smiled harder. Last I checked, roping in the prairie circuit isn't a sin. She'd sked. I promised my brothers I wouldn't sell to anyone in the prairie circuit. That explained so much. And posed a problem that gave Ryan pause. Merry Christmas, Ryan. Joe moved around him toward the door, pointed chin held high. Forget her body language. That was 2 Christmas wishes in the last 5 minutes. More goodwill than their history might warrant. He couldn't give up now. Hang on. If you need to sell a horse and I'm in the market to buy a pair, Ryan said plainly, no guff intended, we should set up a time to. She stopped, fixing Ryan with a questioning look, cutting him off without actually saying a word. They stared at each other. Again, Ryan's pulse ticked up a notch and his smile came more easily, the way it did when he was interested in a woman. But not Joe. Never Joe. Nope, nope, nope. It's because of old times. Their rivalry had been invigorating. Invigorating? Joe shook her head. Why not? If it was something Ryan couldn't get past, he'd look elsewhere. It was just that he'd set his sights on her horses. And once he set his mind to something, he was as stubborn as a mule about getting it. Why not sell to me, Joe? Her cheeks flushed with color. Max elbowed Dean, giving his twin a troublemaking grin. Mr. Ryan, don't you know you ain't supposed to ask why when Mom's already explained it once? Dean nodded solemnly, staring up at Ryan with pity in his young gaze. I'll say it again so you can remember it. The kid cleared his throat. Mom promised our uncles not to sell to Prairie Circuit team ropers. Plus, she doesn't like you, Max added, grinning gleefully. I've gotten past worse obstacles than this, Ryan told them, hanging on to his smile and the impulse to say he could remember a lot. Boys, wait in the truck. Joe's voice was brittle, her stance solid. Only that cheerful holiday wreath on her sweatshirt indicated softness. You're in for it now, mister, Dean prophesied, taking a step back. Max placed his hands over his ears, exchanging a grin with his brother. Stop that, boys. Joe's brittle facade cracked with a hint of a smile, a thin ray of warmth. Ryan is going to think I'm an ogre. Never. Ryan leaped at the opening, no matter how small it might be. Let's just bypass all the hoopla and make a date. Joe froze again, mouth forming a little O. My mom doesn't date. Max's eyes were wide. His smile gone. She says her love of horses is enough. Dean nodded. They think I want to date Joe? Hang on. Ryan tried to backpedal, but he wasn't fast enough. Grandma wants her to date, Dean said solemnly. And Miss Ronnie says she knows Mr. Right, Max added. Miss Ronnie being Joe's friend, a school secretary and a part-time matchmaker for ranch and rodeo folk. That can't be you, though, 'cause she doesn't like you. Ryan said, mind blank. He couldn't even muster a smile Tate would be proud of. If you could get Mom to date you, she might sell you a horse. Max looked Ryan up and down judgmentally. Do you like the look of him, Mom? He's all right, I suppose, Dean said, giving Ryan a similar inspection. But if you want a horse, you have to date Mom more than once. You think you can do that, mister? Grandma says she's as prickly as a dried-out tumbleweed. Boys. Staring at her boots, Joe rubbed her forehead. Please go to the truck. Again, the twins didn't budge. Relieved, Ryan tried again. When I mentioned a date, I was asking when I could look at those horses you want to sell. Not. I know. Joe settled her cowboy hat on her head, blew out a breath that seemed blush erasing, and got right down to business. Even if I would sell to you, which I won't, you can't afford my prices. She leaned forward and gave him a number. That's per horse. $40,000 per horse? Ryan held his breath. Her prices had gone up since last he'd heard. A part of Ryan, the responsible part, passed out on the floor from shock. But somehow, he stayed on his feet. And somehow, he managed to smile and say, so, when should I come by? He should have expected her response. Never. Chapter 3. Why do Uncle Ty and Uncle Eric get a say in who we sell our horses to? Max asked as Joe pulled away from the feed store. Is it because you won't let them ride anything but our horses? Dean asked. I wish that was the case. What might better be wished for was a reduction of curiosity. Her 11-year-olds had started asking questions when they were 3 and hadn't stopped since. Most days, Joe welcomed their inquisitiveness as an educational opportunity. But today, she could have used a little less curiosity toward her least favorite cowboy in Clementine. We're family. And family support one another. Joe repeated what her older brothers had told her years ago, when she'd agreed to their demands in order to keep peace in the family the way Ma wanted her to. But her brother's words didn't hold water when there were bills to pay and team roping buyers on the Prairie Circuit at her door. Buyers like Ryan Oakley. Had she really sunk that low that she'd consider selling to her high school nemesis? Her good-looking, sexy just-breathing, archenemy? He's not Tate. But that didn't answer the question. The question she needed to be asking was of her brothers and their request that she limit her business, of which they had no part in. Maybe I should just tell them I'm going to start selling to folks on the prairie circuit. That wouldn't go over well. And she didn't want to rock the boat until after Nationals in Las Vegas, where Ty and Eric's performance might create a much-needed boost in demand for her horses. Our uncles only win on our horses, Dean said, yawning. Can we drive by the Christmas houses before we go home? Max caught the yawning bug, too. I love Christmas. Me, too, Dean said sleepily. Me, 3. Joe loved the pretty lights and festive packages beneath a colorful tree. She always looked forward to traditions, too, like holiday shopping with her girlfriends and Clementine Santapalooza, a parade of over 100 riders dressed as Santa on Christmas Eve morning. Joe made a turn to drive down Jefferson Street, which was filled with some of the oldest homes in Clementine and some of the biggest displays of holiday cheer, festive lights, lawn displays, outdoor Christmas trees. One house even had a miniature steam train running along a track on the driveway. I've seen Mr. Ryan before, Max said slowly. At the rodeo and at the Dunroman Ranch. I like him. Dean sighed heavily, the way 11-year-old boys did after a long day running around a ranch. I hope we sell him a horse and he wins. You want him to beat your uncles? Joe grinned. Maybe just once, Dean said slowly. If he asks you out, Max added. Date Ryan Oakley? Joe struggled to grasp the concept. Back in their senior year of high school, she and Ryan had been too much alike. Obstinate, defensive, angry. And always in detention together. She'd been that way because that was the year her father began an affair and flaunted it all over town. When he was home, her father was always trying to pick a fight with her mother and wanting the kids to choose sides. Dad had won over Ty and Eric, leaving Joe to defend their mother, who refused to fight in the name of trying to keep the family together. Somehow that fall, she'd become defensive about anything and everything with everyone and had been unwilling to keep all that vulnerability bottled inside. She'd risked friendships, a high school diploma, and her future. She hadn't cared. Where had that ornery Joe been when her brothers proposed she not sell to their competitors? Ryan Oakley would never have agreed to such a demand. He was one of the Dunroman Ranch Fosters, one of the prickliest of the lot. Back in school, no one had seen or heard anything about his and Tate's parents. They'd come from the next county over. Unlike Joe's parents, who were the talk of the town. And somehow, in the midst of her own problems, the mystery of the Oakleys had made Joe curious. The first time she and Ryan had been in detention together their senior year, Joe for sassing a teacher, Ryan for incomplete assignments, Joe had worked up the nerve to ask him, "Where are your parents?" His sharp stare had practically drilled a hole between her eyes. My dad didn't cheat on my mom, if that's what you mean. Now I see why they say Tate is the nice Oakley, Joe had snapped back. And that might have been the end of their skirmishes if not for an incident a few weeks later. It was a tradition at Clementine High School for kids in each class to draw names in December for a week of Secret Santa gift giving before the holiday break. Joe had drawn Tate's name. The first gift she'd planned to give him was sugar cookies with peppermint icing. She'd bribed his ex-girlfriend for his locker combination and had come extra early Monday morning to plant them in his locker. And then she'd waited down the hall for him to arrive, wanting to see his reaction, imagining the smile on his face, a smile she'd have been responsible for. But it was Ryan who opened the locker. And Ryan who took her plate of cookies and dumped it in the trash. And Ryan who'd broken the last straw inside Joe, making a declaration of war. Over the next 6 months, she'd pranked him endlessly, ruthlessly, and without regret. Instead of taking it lying down, Ryan had given back as good as she'd dished out. And now he had the nerve to ask to buy a horse from her? Never. Never. That was pride talking. The voice inside her head that kept track of things like the balance of her bank account and the due date of mortgage payments. That voice had a different reaction. Sell. Sell many. Sell often. She couldn't afford pride. Joe took the road out of Clementine, trying to convince herself that selling to a man she didn't like was the adult thing to do. Oh, but that was a tough internal conversation to hold. and she had to hold it in silence. The boys had fallen asleep in the back seat. She let them, thinking more about the logistics of Ryan's unexpected request. It opened a can of worms with Ty and Eric, but it was a can she'd been avoiding for the past few years. There were 13 PRCA rodeo circuits in the United States and Canada, of which the Prairie Circuit was one. During the main rodeo season, cowboys in the market for a competition horse had to be able to swing by Clementine. Remote as she was, it was hard to promote and sell her horses, especially when her brothers had limited her nearest market for sales. She'd supplemented her income by training horses for others, buying horses from pleasure riders and training them to be ranch mounts, and generally watching every penny. But now there was a balloon payment coming due on the ranch, owed to her estranged father. 2 horse sales had fallen through last month, plus there'd been the return of another. Jo sighed. She needed to find funds somewhere. Inquiries continued to trickle in, but no one wanted to visit or purchase a horse until after the new year. After her balloon payment was due. Her father may have personally financed the ranch mortgage, but he was rabid for her to fail. Jo turned into the driveway of the Pierce Ranch. The Christmas lights outlining the house had come on automatically. Their bright red, blue, green and yellow bulbs welcomed her home. Behind the house, the large roof of the first barn rose up into the dark night sky. She drove past the house and to the barn, then set about unloading the hay bales and feed supplements. Blue, their ranch dog, came out to offer moral support, happily wagging his whip-like tail. He was a leggy, short-haired dog of uncertain lineage with a heart of gold and was delighted to eat the rest of Max and Dean's gingerbread dog biscuit. When Jo was done, Blue hopped in the truck with her. She parked in the attached garage and tried to rouse the boys. "Carry me, Mom," Max mumbled, eyes shut tight. "Carry me," Dean echoed. They may have just turned 11, but they were still young in many ways. A part of her didn't want them to grow up. So she caved. "We're back." Jo entered the kitchen, carrying a groggy Max in a saggy piggyback position. "You're just in time," her mother said, patting Blue on the head when he came to beg for treats in the kitchen. Her brown hair was shorter than Jo's, bangs covering her eyebrows but not the nape of her neck. Her nails were short, too. Everything about the Pierce women was utilitarian. "I tried a new apple pie recipe and it's out of the oven. Let's sit and have a slice. I need to do my rounds first." "Okay, but I want details about that cowboy in town," her mother called after her. "He looked like one of those Oakleys." "I know they're single." "I'm not looking for a man, Ma. Especially not Ryan Oakley. You know, I'm in a relationship with my horses." When she returned, her mother had spread silver, velvety material over the kitchen table and was pinning a paper pattern to the fabric. Only a few more Santa costumes to make before the annual Santapalooza parade. A ride where folks of all ages dressed up like Saint Nick and rode their horses through Clementine. Ma was on the organization committee and made costumes for the event. In silver? That gave Jo pause. Doesn't Santa wear red? I thought Santa needed to shake things up this year. I'm only making a couple, but it might give us a boost in terms of social media if Santa dressed out of his comfort zone. We don't need to make the event bigger, you know. Jo grabbed a fork and stole a bite of warm apple pie, which was just as good as it smelled, sweet and cinnamony. I like knowing who all the Santas are. Including which cowboys don't like to don a white beard at the holidays? Ma chuckled. It's not a crime to have a list of requirements for a man I date. Jo stuck her nose in the air. The next time she got serious about a man, he'd be nice, love his family and adore everything about Christmas the way she did. Even strained families came together at Christmas. Which Oakley was in the feed store? Ma smoothed a pattern piece that didn't seem to lie right. The one who rides in Santapalooza or the one who doesn't? Not that it matters. They both have such handsome, expressive features. It's the eyebrows. They were dark and thick. And when they were younger, an Oakley eyebrow waggle, mostly Tate's, had caused many a swoon. Jo wasn't immune. But she was Team Tate when it came to the Oakleys. Tate was the good-natured twin, the one she'd never had an unkind exchange with, the only man she ever so much as dreamed about dating. Not that Tate knows I'm alive. Joe stepped over Blue and headed toward the garage. It was Scrooge Oakley at the feed store. And before you head down the Heartsanflowers Road again, you know I could never be with a man who didn't love Christmas. Everyone in town knew Ryan only reluctantly participated in the holiday. I could sway him to the jolly side. Ma fiddled with a straight pin to reduce fabric pucker. Everyone should have a Merry Christmas. And everyone should find their forever love. Here we go again. Ma sniffed, picking up her prize fabric scissors. I just don't want you to be alone. You're alone, Joe pointed out, hand on the cool garage doorknob. That's different. I like being a footloose, single grandma. Although Ma's tentative smile hinted otherwise. Maybe I like being a footloose, single mom, Joe countered. You said maybe. Ma pounced on Joe's error. And everyone likes a redeemed Scrooge. Not me. I talked to Ryan about selling him a couple of horses. That's it. End of story. Joe made her exit, shutting the door before her mother could make any more suggestions about her love life. She returned to the house giving a half-asleep Dean a piggyback. These boys are getting too big for me to carry to bed. That's right. You're not getting any younger, Mom said, softening her words by rubbing Joe's shoulder as she passed. But neither am I. You stole the words right out of my mouth. Joe headed down the hall to put Dean to bed. A few minutes and another bite of pie later, Joe strode to the outbuildings to close them for the night. The barn cats were up and about, ready to pounce on Vermin or Blue's wagging tail. Having been pounced on before, the big dog stuck close to Joe's side as she checked on each horse, every filly and colt. You talk a good game about being brave, Blue. Joe gave him a reassuring pat in between picking up a lead rope that had fallen from a hook. But if one kitten looks at you wrong, you make for the hills. Joe glanced around the barn as the wind pressed against the outer walls. She'd added those walls during the first few years of ranch ownership. Before that, there'd been a roof over the open-air stalls and a metal shed where tack and feed were stored. When she was little, she could remember running after Eric, Ty, and her father in the aisles between stalls, listening to Dad's lectures about horse training, her telling them that she could help, that she could rope, that she was going to be a great horse trainer and run the ranch someday. For the most part, they'd ignored her. But that hadn't deterred Joe. She just tried harder to do what her brothers did, to garner her father's attention, to earn his praise. Thankfully, Eric, who was only 3 years older than Joe, had taken her seriously when she was 8 or 9. Or at least, he'd been willing to mentor her horse training and roping skills. She'd ridden as the header roper while he rode heeler. It had given Eric more time to practice. It had given Joe an insight into how the small things about a horse and rider's performance could make big gains. Not that her father felt the same way. He'd been raising and training horses part-time back then. The quicker he trained them, the quicker he could make money. He had no patience for refining a horse or rounding out their skills. In hindsight, he preferred to break a horse's spirit to nurturing the animal's drive to compete and win. Joe could relate. He'd tried to break her spirit, too, but she'd refused to be cowed. She supposed the experience had made her stronger. And yet there was still a little girl inside of her who yearned for her daddy's praise. Blue had his nose to the ground at a stall door. He whined and scratched the floor. A black cat paw took a swipe at him from the gap beneath the stall door. Blue leaped back. Come on, boy, Joe called, shaking off the memories. Lots to do before bed. Which always came too late, and the morning too early. They walked out of the first barn and toward the newest one, passing by the wagon waiting to be decorated for Santapalooza. The wagon gave those who didn't have a horse or couldn't ride away to participate. She and Ma decorated it differently every year. They hadn't decided on a theme for this year and the 24th was fast approaching. But Joe's to-do list seemed to be growing, not shrinking. Stress gathered in her chest, quickened her breath, slowed her steps. Is this the year it all falls apart? The year she didn't make the mortgage. The year she let the Santapalooza ride and everyone in Clementine down. The year she had to pack up and move on to work for someone else, uprooting the boys and selling off the horses she'd invested her heart and soul in. Blue woofed and bounded ahead with a carefree, powerful grace that lightened her spirits. One step at a time. Right, Blue? She followed the dog into the second barn, where the horses at the later stages of training and Joe's breeders were kept, repeating her goodnight ritual with every horse. She paused at Tiger's stall near the end of her rounds. The stocky chestnut ambled up to her and submitted to a bit of petting. "What am I going to do with you?" He blew a raspberry, as if trying to say that the buyer who returned him was full of stuff and nonsense. "That's enough attitude, mister. If I'm hanging on to you, you need to earn your keep." And since he'd been gelded, breeding wasn't an option. Breeding. Romance. Love. Joe moved on, thoughts turning to her dateless life as she finished locking up. Who needed love? Joe had nothing to complain about. She had a social life with her girlfriends. She had family. And 2 barns full of horses that gave her varying degrees of affection. But it would be nice to have a man's arms encircle her, to lean against a strong, warm chest, to lift her face and stare into someone's eyes as she waited for a tender kiss. Joe stared up at the night sky, catching sight of a falling star and making a wish, a young wish, a foolish wish. For love. When Ryan pulled into the yard at the Dunroman Ranch after talking to Joe, his foster brother Wade was walking his fiancée, Ronnie, to her little green Volkswagen. The couple were both dressed in jeans, boots and cowboy hats, and bundled into thick winter coats. They spoke quietly, intimately, as they neared Ronnie's car. Something panged deep inside Ryan. Something he didn't want to name. He glanced away, attention immediately claimed by the huge Christmas tree in the large window of the main ranch house. His gaze shifted to the inflatable set of reindeer on the lawn, then to the pulsing, colorful lights outlining his foster parents' home. His family went all out on the holiday. Or rather, his foster mother. She was probably inside decorating the interior or making cookies, singing Christmas carols off-key and checking her gift list twice. Wade opened the car door for Ronnie, one of Joe's closest friends. Duh. Ryan hopped out of his truck. Hey, Ronnie, do you have a minute? Sure. She snuggled closer to Wade, jingling her key ring. What's up? Ryan jogged up to them. I want to pick your brain about Joe Pierce. About Joe? Ronnie, a budding matchmaker, frowned slightly. If you're looking to date her, you've got a lot of prep work to do first. And I mean, a lot. You like Joe? Wade took a dramatic step back, clutching his chest, teasing the way close brothers did with equal parts affection and mischief. Yikes. Memories of your senior year. If there was a category in the yearbook for best rivalry, they would have put yours and Joe's pictures there. I can't believe there are sparks between you two. Ryan couldn't either. But before he could say so, Ronnie weighed in. I can put my mind to who'd be more open to your charms than Joe, Ryan. As if no women immediately came to mind. He has charms? Wade laughed. I'm dateable, Wade, Ryan said with strained patience. I just don't want to date Joe. I want to buy a horse from her and move up the leaderboard. Oh, they both said, quieting. A brisk prairie wind tested the stakes holding the inflatable reindeer to the ground. Unfortunately, Joe, Ronnie began apologetically. Well, the mere mention of your name makes Joe tense. She hasn't forgotten high school. The lights outlining the main house's front porch strobed to an instrumental version of a Jingle Bells. Ryan closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. But that couldn't stop the image of his biological parents drunkenly singing along to the same tune as they walked to the car where they'd left their boys on a cold winter night.